Hey, good morning, everyone. I understand I'm live now. Welcome to today's webinar, Avoiding a Car-Based Recovery, Data and the Evidence Base. I'm Tom van Vuren. I'm chairing today's event, and a quick introduction to who I am. I'm the Regional Director for the UK and Europe for Australian Transport Consultancy, VLC, and I'm also a visiting professor at the University of Leeds and a board director at the Transport Planning Society. If you see my eyes wander, I'm using two screens, so please allow me that little luxury. I must say I'm one of those few nerdy people who are passionate about data and transport modeling, their role in evidence-based decision making. So this is a really interesting webinar from my perspective. Now, if you look back 18 months, I think that anybody would have been happy with any recovery from what certainly to me then seemed a potentially everlasting, never-ending pandemic. But we have recovered, and we've recovered to a large extent. But most of us, I think, will agree that we'd hoped that the measures that were put in place during the first lockdown, low traffic neighborhoods and pop-up cycle lanes, for example, would have had a more lasting and a more visible impact on the way in which people move now in September 2021. Car traffic has bounced back unexpectedly to me to even pre-pandemic levels. Commercial traffic even more. Public transport usage is still well below its pre-pandemic levels, but is slowly climbing. When will previous levels of PT users be reached? If ever. So doesn't mean that what we see now is the end of the road. Many people, including myself, are still adjusting their daily activity patterns, and therefore our daily travel needs and options are changing as well. So the question of avoiding a car-based recovery, even though we've seen these major increases in car traffic in the past few months, avoiding a car-based recovery is still a valid question and a very worthwhile challenge. So I hope to learn today from the speakers what tools and data are available to us to help avoid baking in what seemingly is now, which may seem to be a return to car dependence. And also I'd like to learn, and I hope that I'm not putting the speakers in an impossible spot here, if there is evidence that the COVID supporting measures such as LTNs have really had a positive impact and perhaps have not been promoted sufficiently. So that's it. We've got four speakers: Dan Saunders, Laurence Oakes-Atch, Philip Lavin and Duane Hodges-Stubbs. They will introduce themselves a little bit more in detail within their 15-minute presentations. In your box on the right, you will see a handout that is the actual modeling and data yearbook that this webinar is based on. So absolutely feel free to download that if you haven't got a copy yet. Lots of interesting stuff in there about, as you would expect, data and modeling services and suppliers. If you've got questions, please pop them in the questions box, again in your right-hand control box, or the right-hand for me. And I will try to direct them to each of the speakers in the Q&A session that we have at the end. If they're meant for any of the four speakers specifically, please make that clear in your question itself as well. Otherwise, I will have to allocate them as equitably as I can. Okay, let's get on to the speakers now. And we'll start with Dan. Dan is head of product at Basemap. And incredibly, Dan told me yesterday that he once ate dog food for a BBC One primetime program. Now, one of the questions you may ask Dan, and I will definitely ask him for you, is what it actually tastes like. But on to more relevant points. Dan, can I ask you to start?
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. Two questions I get asked most is, was the dog food tasty? No, it wasn't. And was I drunk? No, I wasn't as well. So yes, so yeah, I'm Dan Saunders. I'm head of products at Basemap. Next slide, please. There'll be a lot of Chris Whitty, I think, today going on. So yeah, so I'm going to be talking today about us at Basemap and what we do and how we're kind of using transportation data and creating data to help people make informed decisions about travel choice and travel modes when they go back to work or go and travel to key destination points. Yes, so we're Basemap, we established 21 years ago. We're primarily a provider of software solutions focused around transportation and data. And we are very much experts in public transport data. So we produce national data sets that have timetables that are pushed into open data. So the TNDS is one of those, and we have the National Coach Services database as well. Through our track software, we've got users all around the world, from North America to New Zealand. There's over 800 of them scattered around the place using track to make informed transportation decisions. And we've got people from central government agencies, so people at Department for Transport, Transport Canada, people like that are our customers, due to more local governments, regional governments as well. We've got the NHS, big clients of ours as well, looking at how access can be improved to sites and from sites, as well as private sector clients who are supporting the industry as well. And it's been quite exciting. So track's been used before to look at improving access at a really small level, so looking at improving access across a railway bridge or something small like that, to a large infrastructure project like Crossrail, or to the Ottawa, and they use it for the Confederation line there. Next slide, please. So what we thought we'd do is we'd look at how effectively we could use data to stop people using their cars kind of going forward. So we're going to look at a few different ways which has been done by clients in the past. So we're going to highlight a couple of case studies of how this has been produced. I'm going to look into a bit more around sustainable transport and what that looks like. Next slide, please. So it kind of sells you side. So why use our track software? So our track software is a very detailed way of doing travel time access calculations. So it's really perfect for loading in detailed data sets, so public transport timetables, walking routes, drive time routes, origins, so where people start from and where they're going to. And it allows people to edit that data within the system as well. So you can edit the information to do what if scenarios. So track is already used a lot to create travel plans, to look at new development, local plans, housing access, and things like that. Next slide, please. So when we talk about sustainable access and sustainable transport, the first thing I always comes to my mind is, what is a sustainable journey? So obviously you've got the public transport element, the walking element, and the bicycle element of that. But I think time is a really important thing to do. So if you want to switch someone from using their car to using a bus, if it takes them 2 hours on the bus, and they've got to take 10 buses to do it, that's not sustainable really in a way, and we're never going to convince someone to travel in a different way as part of that. And as Tom mentioned a second ago, you know, bus patronage is really down at the moment, but car usage is really up, and we've seen that quite a lot in the industry. So some of the work we do for the Department for Transport looks at coach routes and coach services, and this is the two kind of charts on the right-hand side kind of show how actually the number of routes is almost back to the pre-pandemic levels, but actually the journeys, so the 810 from London, Victoria to Edinburgh, them actual journeys are really down. They're still at about 30% of pre-pandemic levels. So the transport network is changing all the time. So the actual data land set is changing all the time. And so you need to look at this modeling, and data becomes really important to work out, actually, can someone get there sustainably on a bus or walking? And this ties into the stuff that's been done previously around 20-minute cities and 15-minute neighborhoods. And this is all around access. So looking at access for walking and public transport and finding out how accessible a place is. Next slide, please. So over the previous 12 months at Basemap, we've been doing some studies looking at the 12 most populated areas and finding out actually how much of a 20-minute city they are. I suggest looking at our website. We've looked at, I said, about 9 of them so far, all with different kind of ranges from being really accessible to none. And for each city, we've done a study that looks like this. So on the left-hand map, we've got transport up to 20 minutes to supermarkets. So anything in a green color is accessible within 20-minute public transport or walking. And it's the areas in white are the areas of concern, because they're the places where if you were to live in that region, you'd have to use a car because there's no public transport mode or walking access, so there's no destination within that point. And then using demographic data, we'll be able to score each one based on the percentage of population able to access. So to supermarkets, we've got 97.6% of the population with a 20-minute commute. To the right, to hospitals and GPs, it's around the same at 97.51%. And next slide, please. And then when we look at primary schools, there's generally a lot of primary schools around, and so they generally have quite good access. That's represented by just under 98%, and that's actually an area we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail in a second. And then we have secondary schools, there's less of them, and so we've only got 92% of people able to access it. And that raises the question, actually, what is an appropriate time for a secondary school? I remember when I was a child, people would get a bus for half hour, 40 minutes to the local secondary school. So maybe that's not appropriate for looking at 20-minute access. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at access as well, we can look at pure access to the public transport stop, and that's something we do as well. So 400 meters is always a bit of a buzzword when it comes to development. And so the map on the left is showing crow flies, so allowing people to walk in a straight line through buildings, over rivers, not using the footpath network to get to a bus stop. And we can see quite a large area is covered by that. And on the right-hand side, we're using detailed authoritative data to work out where people can and can't walk, showing a lesser area. If we go to the next slide, we can then see what the difference is in the percentage. So we can see that it's almost 88% of people are within 400 meters of a bus stop as the crow flies. But when we drill down using proper underlying data, we can see it's actually really only 67% of people. And that's a really interesting figure to use. This is why using good transportation data sets is really important to get that view across. And if we go to the next slide, we can drill down into that a bit more information. So one of our clients, Staffordshire County Council, wanted to try and promote that modal shift. They knew that around their primary schools in the mornings, they had lots and lots of people dropping their kids off in cars, and it was boosting congestion and there's safety issues for that. So they then used a thing called Hodges-Stubbs effectively to start looking at printing travel time maps. And these maps we put in the new starters for primary schools or transition packs as well for secondary school pupils. And so the aim was effectively to promote that actually you can walk, you can do this journey sustainably. And they also promoted a thing called park and stride, where you'd make park 10 minutes away and then stride in that final distance. The thought was to get people to use that kind of walking element. So what they did, if you can look at the next slide, is they produced a leaflet that had the 10-minute commute time or walk time around the actual primary school location to give that information to pupils as they started. They also put things on there such as key cycle routes, showing where people could cycle as part of it as well as bus stops and other information. So effectively, no one had to go and search for information. You're starting primary school, you're in your starter pack, and you can see that information straight away. And it was really successful. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a nice little quote saying actually using this information, they managed to do a 27% increase in sustainable travel. So effectively, that was taking 1 in 3 cars off the road near the primary school to start off with. Just by giving that information, there's no kind of forcing of the issue, just by showing them that actually you could do it in a different way, people were able to do that. So that was a really, really good kind of story. And it's quite a good thing you can kind of see, maybe being really important in a post-COVID recovery, trying to give that information to people. If we go to the next slide. That was one way, and you could use that maybe the kind of carrot approach, where you're kind of enticing people to do it. With Oxfordshire NHS Foundation Trust, they need to take a different view of things. So as an organisation, they have thousands of staff parking across hundreds of sites, about 150 different sites in total they manage. But they have a real issue when they went live that they never had a system in place that anyone would drive there that could. So you have people driving over a 15-minute walk away, but because they could do that, no one ever stopped them. And that meant they didn't have enough car parking spaces. So they had staff members parking in the visitors' car parking, in the red routes, blocking ambulances and things like that. So it became quite apparent they needed to put some sort of car parking system in that was fair for everyone. And so they wanted to work out a way of getting accurate information, accurate data out, so data being reports as well as images and travel time contours to work out actually for staff members, could they travel in by a different mode? And they worked with the union and management to work out what that looked like. So they worked out that an acceptable door-to-door travel time would be a 25-minute walk or cycle, or a 45-minute bus or train commute in both directions, looking at the complete journey, so any walking elements that are required as part of that as well. And it's important to say the 45 minutes was getting to the site as well as home from the site. So they found that some buses might get you there in 40 minutes in the morning for your starting shift pattern, but in the afternoon it might take 50 minutes. So in that example, they'd be able to get a car parking permit. So if you go to the next slide, we can see a map of kind of what that looks like. So the first map we can see here is a 25-minute walk across a few of their sites in and around Oxford. So this travel time is done using Ordnance Survey highways and paths data, which is an authoritative data set. And you can see that anyone who would live within those areas would be able to walk to the sites and can get a car parking permit. We can look at the same on the next slide for cycling. So obviously showing a greater area, you can travel a greater distance on a bike within 25 minutes, as you'd expect. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the first of the public transport journeys. So the public transport journey here is the outbound. On the next slide. Yep, so here's the public transport journey on the outbound side of things. So what we can see here is where you've got good transportation routes linking different villages together. We give them kind of blue transportation, so the 30 to 45 minutes, kind of expanding out north to south across the transport corridors. And if you look at the inbound, this is a journey on the next slide at the end of the day. We can see actually it offers slightly more accessibility during that time. So you can see a few more kind of areas being covered. And whilst the maps are absolutely great and they're great for visualization, representation, on the next slide, we'll see what they actually used. And here we can see the reporting that was done. So effectively, they would load in the postcodes of staff members. And against that postcode, they'd have a cycle time, a cycle distance, a walk time, a walk distance, and a public transport time in each direction. This would then go into their HR system. And then once it was in their HR system, a new employee would come along and say, this is my place of work, this is where I live at home. And this is what my journey time is, and you get a ticker across if that was acceptable to get a car parking permit or not. And if we go to the next slide, we've got a little quote here saying how great it was, and they like it so much. And talking about the change in the network, they run this every year going forwards. If we go to the next slide, so the other thing that's really important for our customers to do is look at changing to the network. So what we've done here is we've looked at changing access to one of the hospitals. They've done it to our local business park at the moment. They put a minibus in from the local station to where we work. And so we kind of modelled that here for one site. So we're looking at Witney Hospital. We put a new minibus in from Hanborough Station to the hospital. And we've improved the walking routes and the access to the north of the site as well. So if we go to the next slide, we can see what current access is looking like to the Witney Hospital site. I've overlaid some postcodes of potential staff member locations as well, so you can start seeing the visual representation of where staff live and where access is at the moment. If you go to the next slide, it's a bit of a spot the difference. You can see the new routes being shown in yellow with where that new minibus is going, representing a 12-minute door-to-door journey time, representing that the area in red is now around the station, represented by that. And we've seen some other improvements to the outskirts. If you go to the next slide, you can see the previous map again. And if you go back to the next slide, we can see the same image again as well. So again, a bit of a spot the difference there. Okay, so if we go to the final slide here, so to kind of summarize, I think there's a good role to play here. I think cities and regions looking at 15-minute neighbourhoods and 20-minute kind of cities have a good way of effectively working out which areas have good access or don't have access at the moment. So that's a really good way to have an overarching view of where access needs to be improved to ensure people aren't over-reliant on the car kind of going forwards. Though I do like these local schemes, I really love the kind of mode shift stars approach, having a 27% shift, just by giving people that information is a really, really good way of going about things. However, sometimes you can't force someone to make that change. This is where I think large employers and large business sites have a duty of care to force people to use other modes of transport. The worst you want is someone that can get to a site within 15 minutes driving because they can do it. I think we try and force them people not to use their car kind of going forwards. And I think you always have to have a robust evidence base as well. So you do use authoritative data to start off with, software that gives the right kind of answers at the end. So if someone comes back and scrutinizes your results, they'll kind of hold up. And on the final slide just here, here's my contact details. As Tom kind of said a minute ago, feel free to ask me any questions in the chat, or we're on social media, or there's my email address there if you've got anything else. So thank you very much.
Excellent, Dan. Stuck to time, which helps me, but I think a lot of food for thought for people that are attending around how the examples that you've used could be applicable to their work, not just obviously for hospitals or primary schools, but for many other applications as well. So thank you. Moving on to the next speaker, Laurence, who is the founder and CEO of CityScience. And as far as I can see, but I haven't done a really in-depth analysis, Laurence, you are the only chartered management accountant who is active in transport planning and modeling, but you may confirm that, or you may say that I've got it absolutely wrong.
I think that's probably true, yeah.
Anyway, welcome. And please, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Good morning, so I'm Laurence Oaksash, CEO of CityScience. So it's great to be talking about avoiding a car-based recovery. So CityScience was founded out of the need to decarbonise. So if we move to the next slide, what we do as a company is we help organisations who are committed to decarbonisation that aren't progressing as quickly as they'd like. And we help people understand their decarbonisation pathways using data and modelling to help drive understanding. So next slide, please. So just before I start, I just want to give you a bit of background about us and what makes us different. So we're an SME that combines expertise in decarbonisation, sustainable transport and transport planning with modelling and analytics. We actually focus across energy, the built environment and carbon accounting, not just transport, which gives us a really kind of unique view of the interplays and best practices occurring in other sectors. And finally, we're innovators with an ongoing programme of decarbonisation research. And in the transport space, this is particularly focused around the decarbonisation of freight and public transport. So lots of work and research on how we can avoid a recovery that locks in the same kinds of behaviours and ultimately the carbon emissions that we want to avoid. Next slide. So this slide just sets out what I'm going to talk about over the next 10 minutes. So first, I'm going to walk through some of my thoughts on modelling for net zero, the context and some of the different types of questions we might want to ask of our transport models as we're thinking about decarbonisation and planning much more sustainably. Then we're going to look at some of the data and modelling gaps and look at what tools are available that can help fill these gaps. And finally, we're going to touch on some of the next steps, some of the things that you can do almost immediately to help you start thinking about a more sustainable recovery. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start by providing some context. As we've heard from other speakers in other webinars, and it's a well-trodden ground now, transport is the largest contributor to carbon emissions in the UK. The 2050 net zero target implies levels of emission reduction not hitherto seen in the transport sector during normal times. And looking what's happened at the height of the pandemic is actually really important to help us understand the scale of change needed. So to put the reductions in carbon in context, we need to see levels of reduction on par with what we saw during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic to be locked in by 2025, with similar levels of cuts beyond that point. So obviously we have the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, which sets out one decarbonisation pathway to 2050, but obviously there are lots of different pathways that places will choose to adopt. And we're definitely seeing very varied responses from local authorities. So many have adopted targets that are more ambitious than those at a national level, and many are looking for ways they can focus much more on travel demand reduction and modal shift to deliver those goals. So I think understanding the local context, the aspirations and plans to deliver travel behaviour change is going to be critical to ensure that models represent a local picture for transport demand that might contrast quite a lot with what's being presented at a national level. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'd say as we're thinking about a sustainable recovery is how up to date are the most basic assumptions in our models for what are actually very large changes in the local context. So the pandemic has opened our eyes to what can be achieved through demand reductions and modal shift, and these are things that feature heavily in many of the decarbonisation pathways we're involved with. But there's a big gap here between growing levels of aspiration to avoid a car-based recovery and some of those more national projections for continued car growth. So I just wanted to show you an alternative decarbonisation pathway to that presented in the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, just to bring this home. So in this example decarbonisation pathway, this is one we developed as part of a project for the Royal Town Planning Institute. And what's important about this is it's much more aligned to those more ambitious local authority goals. So this particular pathway meets the objective of an 80% reduction in carbon by 2030. Now that might seem a lot, but it's actually not that different or dissimilar from the government's own interim target for a 78% reduction in carbon by 2035. So this pathway is based on a clear hierarchy: trip reduction, then modal shift, and then fuel switching. And in reality, we see pathways like this as the most likely way of being able to achieve the more ambitious levels of targets that are being set by local authorities. So we also see authorities and regions looking at this kind of approach because it's much more aligned to the better quality of life and placemaking objectives, things like 15-minute and 20-minute neighbourhoods, as we've seen from the previous speaker. Now, obviously, because the focus is on trip reduction, this is not a pathway where demand for travel goes up. Instead, we actually see demand falling by 14%. And there's a couple of other important points within this pathway. For this to be achieved, new developments, so new housing, can't lead to new carbon. At a minimum, new developments are carbon neutral, but may even potentially be carbon negative. So there needs to be something fundamentally different about the way we think about housing and how it generates trips. And then finally, we have some ambitious modal shift assumptions, which will ultimately require reallocation of road space away from cars and other mechanisms to reduce demand. So the key point is that I think it's really important that transport model forecasts looking out over the next 20 years are consistent with emerging local aspirations to avoid a car-based recovery. So I would ask everyone on this call to go back and look at your models. How much vehicle growth are they forecasting? How much vehicle growth is being forecast in national models for your region? Is that really consistent with where you want to be? And what does that mean for any business cases that you have in the pipeline? And I think those are some really fundamental questions that we're all grappling with as an industry. Next slide, please. So the second thing to think about as you're looking at your models is, can they support the questions you're going to need to be able to answer to deliver net zero? So traditionally, much of our modelling is focused around predicting peak capacity, a focus on congestion and what happens when the network is fully loaded. However, as we move to use models to think more about net zero and to delivering decarbonisation, we actually want to be able to ask and answer a much wider range of questions. At the simplest level, I'd suggest this is about providing a much more accurate depiction of baseline emissions that reconciles to national data sets and provides a detailed understanding of the key emission drivers within your region. Once you've got that, there's no reason why with models actually targeted towards predicting those emissions, that then they wouldn't be used much more in helping us determine realistic reductions by source. So answering questions such as, what should our targets be? How will we get there? And how quickly can we get there? As I've alluded to in the previous slides, modelling processes also need to be able to capture and support the expected effects of demand reduction initiatives. That means having a much greater understanding of the behavioural side, how non-infrastructure actions will lead to results. It's also natural that standard models will need to be much more multimodal to help in the design of active travel strategies and interventions, bus service improvement plans and other public transport strategies. Transport models also need to have a much stronger link to the understanding of fuels, helping us understand options for freight decarbonisation on key routes and grid impacts. And finally, I can also see models being an important and essential asset in the monitoring process. So taking the most up-to-date data and converting it into insights about how different interventions are performing. So overall, lots of different ways I think we're likely to want to use models as we move towards net zero, with big implications for how they're designed in order to fulfill those needs. Next slide, please. So hopefully we're getting a good sense of what we might want, but are data and modelling tools to support all of these sorts of questions actually there? Well, to some extent, yes, and to some extent, no. So I'd characterise the situation as follows. There are three main groups to think about. Firstly, data we do have but currently don't use. Secondly, data we'd like but don't have. And finally, models we don't have or modelling gaps. Next slide. As I mentioned previously, traditionally the focus of transport models has been to address issues of network capacity. This means we've been focused on peak hour congestion, often in urban areas where junctions are constrained. As we shift to thinking about carbon emissions, we actually need models that represent the whole region in sufficient detail and at all times of day, and that capture all the reasons why people travel. At a very basic level, we can use things like the National Travel Survey to get a much richer picture of the total carbon emissions from something like personal trips. We can use aggregate data to provide a much more comprehensive representation of the trips that includes rural environments. And we can also use the data we have about the time of trips to do much more profiling throughout the day. So we can create models to do this, but it's not a process that's currently embedded within the way we design transport models more widely. Next slide. But obviously there's also lots of data that we don't have, and this is a simple list of data gaps that came immediately to mind, covering some of the data we might like for baselining, i.e. what information we have about them now, data about prediction, and our understanding of fuels. So examples include, precise reasons why people are traveling, data on trip trains, demographically linked trips, occupancy of vehicles, preferences, in particular, I think, around generalized cost for active travel, freight patterns, and aviation. So obviously, if we have a resident or territorial-based model for carbon emissions, aviation is also something we might want to think about and ideally influence. In terms of prediction, there is lots of evidence, but it's not in a consistent manner. And so genuinely useful evaluation data that covers a whole range of interventions isn't very easy to find, and we can talk about that later. And then in terms of fuels, it would be great to understand, the state of charge at different points in the network, have consistent electrical capacity data, have consistent data around the investment pipeline for the electrical grid, and grid carbon intensity by geography. So those are just a few things that are on my wish list. Next slide, please. And finally, in this section, I wanted to touch on some of the models we don't have. So I've mentioned rural coverage, and so if you look at the image on the left there, and I didn't want to put anyone on the spot in the UK, so this image here is not from a model in the UK, but in the majority of UK models, you see a very similar picture. You see lots of detail within the urban areas and then less detail in the rural areas. Now, the challenge with having an urban focus is that many of the trips from rural areas are actually, on average, longer than the trips made within urban areas. So on average, a settlement in a rural setting will have a higher per capita transport carbon emissions than a city centre, for example. So understanding these trips, modelling the effects of interventions in these areas is something I think we really need our models to be able to do. Secondly, if you look at the middle here, so public transport and active travel, obviously we have lots of tools that can provide public transport models, but I think the challenge is many local authorities still don't have a highly developed public transport models that would help them answer many of the questions that they may have. Then we think about active travel outside some of the bespoke tools in cities like London. Again, we don't have systems that provide insights in the same way that traditional transport models do for road. And finally, a big gap in our climate response is around freight. So freight makes a huge contribution to transport carbon emissions, but many reviews of freight data have talked about freight blindness, the fact that we don't have consistent, open, transparent data or models available to help us understand freight movements. So I think there's lots to do on the data and modelling side to give regions and cities more tools in the fight against climate change. Next slide, please. But what I thought I'd do briefly is just touch on some of the tools that do exist. And as I like the rule of three, I've put this into three main categories as well. So firstly, we have high-level planning tools. So these are often more data-led rather than model-led, although there are some elements of models within them. Usually they're focused on a specific planning issue, for example, the propensity to cycle tool. We have at City Science a tool that's specifically aimed at developing carbon pathways, decarbonisation pathways in transport. And then there are a wide range of digital tools like our Cadence 360 products, like Plan Wisely, like Basemap, products like Remix that provide multimodal context about a region and help in planning more sustainable transport infrastructure. Secondly, there are specific models. Some of these require bespoke development, while others are more open and use open data sources such as AV Streets. One further piece of modelling work worth mentioning is the National Freight Model. This is something we're developing as part of the Geospatial Commission's Transport Location Data Competition, which aims to plug key gaps in this critical area for decarbonisation. So if you're interested in freight and want to find out more about that model, then we'd love to speak to you. And then the final category I think worth mentioning are model conversion tools. So these are tools that allow you to take data from one model and convert it into another format where you can augment it and enhance it so you can answer many more of the types of questions that we talked about earlier. So these sorts of tools help you take the investment you've already made in a roads-based model and convert it into something that can answer many more of those important decarbonisation questions. At City Science, we do this a lot to help local authorities get more out of their existing modelling assets, in particular Saturn models, where we convert that into an open source microsimulation format. From there, you can do lots of unique and novel things related to carbon emissions, air quality, or just linking the model to new data science techniques. Next slide. So finally, I just wanted to touch on what's next. So we've seen how thinking about models for a low carbon future, there's a lot of work still to be done. The way we think about models needs to change significantly to support the new questions we need to answer. And there are data and modelling gaps that we need to address. But these challenges may feel medium to longer term. Is there anything that you can do today immediately to help avoid a car-based recovery? And I think the answer is yes. So the COVID-19 pandemic has created major changes to the way that we work and our preferences for business travel more generally. And this is something that we can actually factor into our models today. So this slide shows a couple of the outputs of a model we've developed for England's economic heartland based on continuous survey data that was undertaken during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this model allows us to model the propensity to work from home for any zoning system or geography. And it's based on some fantastic data that we've been able to gain access to. And this allows us to pinpoint where are those locations where demand reduction is actually possible. How much could we shift demand in those areas? And also on the flip side of that, which are the areas, demand pairs or corridors, where alternatives to the private car are going to be most important? So a really useful tool to start thinking about what targeting messaging you could push out, what employment sites you want to work with, and what the impacts could be in trying to avoid a car-based recovery. So just if we turn to the final slide, if you've got any questions or want to find out anything more about anything that I've talked about today, do get in touch, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Laurence. Again, fantastic timekeeping, most important as far as I'm concerned as a chair. Your presentation made me think about the transport decarbonisation plan, and it's got a lot of targets in there, but not necessarily evidence yet on how they can be achieved. On the other hand, a number of interventions that are presented and promoted, but without being clear on how they will contribute to those targets. So I agree with you. There's a need for data, there's a need for modelling, and that will not go away. But perhaps you would expect me to say that now, wouldn't you? So yeah, to the audience, to attendees, some questions have been coming through for Dan. So please add your questions for Laurence in the panel. I will try to juggle them at the end of this session. Moving on to the third speaker, Philip Lavin, who's Business Development Manager at CitySwift. Now, apparently, Philip is dialing in from the most westerly point in Ireland. You have to explain to me where that is, Philip. My knowledge of the geography of Ireland isn't great. So if the connection isn't good, if Philip comes through a little bit shaky, that's probably the reason why. Philip.
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Good morning. Yes, I'm dialing in from Clare in the west of Ireland. So I think that was my caveat as well, just to make sure if I did drop off, it's not my fault. It's the broadband out here in rural Ireland. But yeah, that's hopefully anyway we can stay on track for the next 10 to 15 minutes anyway, and we can explain what CitySwift does.
Good.
Yeah, perfect. Right. So thank you, Tom. So what is CitySwift? Basically, where we see ourselves is we're the specialist data platform that is powering the modern bus network. What ultimately we do is we identify inefficiencies in bus networks. We aim to increase reliability and then improve customer satisfaction. I suppose we're based in Galway, again, the west of Ireland. We're a team predominantly made up of data scientists, software engineers, but also transport experts. So I suppose our clients include National Express, First Group, Go Ahead. We're working with Transport for Wales, and we literally kicked off our first North American project with the MTA in New York this week. So very exciting times, but I suppose our product was developed with the private operators. So we've always been very focused on making bus networks as efficient as possible, and ultimately being able to just identify these inefficiencies. I suppose in the past few years, so we've started to move a little bit more into the public sector and try to understand exactly how we fit in there, and seeing how we can share data with public authorities and bridge that gap between private operator and public authorities. I suppose what I was hoping to do today is look, I think first just give a very brief introduction about the company, a little bit on how it works, what we're doing on the data side. There's some pretty smart stuff that we're doing. Then go into just a short case study about probably just really focusing down on how we are making bus as attractive as possible to compete with car. And then finally probably just leave with some benefits of the CitySwift platform. But first we'll probably just identify some of the challenges. So obviously we're slide up here already. So yeah, these are the three main ones that we're seeing. I know that Dan and Tom have probably alluded to these already, but I suppose the huge one at the moment is the rise of flexible working. And I think bus networks need to adapt to these new travel patterns and demand trends. Like we have seen a variety of different peaks emerge through COVID. We saw leisure travel being the one that was the real or the fastest recovering for bus operators at one point. But ultimately, I think what we really need to understand is these new origin destination models. I suppose the other big challenge is the economic support. Local authorities, Department of Transport are footing huge bills to keep bus services afloat, and understanding, tying back into these origin destination matrices and understanding this new demand, where is supply actually able to be maintained when, say, some of this funding is turned off. And then I suppose what we're all here to discuss today is look, it's very worrying. You see the increase of private car. We've our clients in the UK, and when we speak to our North American clients, they're all seeing car come back to 90%, and that was even through March, April, May, and bus ridership is still in that kind of 30, 40, 50%, and it is slowly increasing, but worryingly, the car has returned quicker after all the good work that has been done over previous years. I suppose the final line below is, look, these are all trends that have been massively accelerated by COVID, and public transport just has to respond to them. And I suppose in some ways, CitySwift has, our data-driven approach has become more important than ever. And I'll probably just give you a little quick overview on the next slide of what exactly we do. So the big thing that we do, I think transport data is inherently dirty. And what we are very good at is joining these data sets that have never been pulled together before and making unique, richer, data sets that can provide insights that you're able to actually see the performance of your network over time periods. But also, I suppose what we really are good at is actually being able to provide actionable insights and being able to use our predictive models as to, we've seen this happen over the historical period, and this is what we think you should do. So ultimately, what we've been able to do is increase reliability, making sure the bus is on time and making the bus as attractive as possible. Obviously, a huge part of our job over the last 18 months and probably over the next 12 is making sure that we are matching the right supply to the correct passenger demand, and ultimately making bus more convenient. I might just go a little bit deeper into what we do on how it works in the next slide. So yeah, look, what we do, we deal with three main data sources, and it's probably unique to CitySwift. So we obviously ingest schedules. Obviously, the bread and butter of any bus network. We ingest the real-time data. But what we do very cleverly is we also include that with the patronage data, which is probably unique to CitySwift. I think two big things that allows us to. The first one, it allows us to analyze performance at bus stops. So we can see, how long a bus is spending at a bus stop. We can also see how much of that, we split that time into dwell time of unneeded dwell time and I suppose revenue generating dwell time. So when the bus is actually taking on passengers. When we identify that unneeded dwell time, we look to maybe redeploy that elsewhere in the bus schedule or potentially remove it and reduce the journey time of the bus. But I suppose the other really smart thing, and it was something that was mentioned, I think, in one of the previous slides, is we've been able to do that trip chaining. So we are able to see when people get on, but with our models, we're able to see where people are getting off as well. And that has become very, very important for bus operators and hopefully as we grow, more local authorities and transport authorities to understand exactly how your patronage is moving. So ultimately, we join those three data sets. And when you join the three of those, it increases the integrity of the data that we have. And that's something that we've probably learned in the last 12 months that is a real USP of what we do. And we probably where we didn't speak about it enough, but being able to have this really, really strong data set and then build your models off that. I suppose the machine learning and the artificial intelligence piece, look, there's huge different amount of elements to it. I think the first strand is frequency. That's ultimately what we're always trying to do. It's trying to find that optimal frequency. Unfortunately, you can't have 13.1 buses on a route. If you have 13.1, you're going to have to run a 14th bus because there isn't 1/10 of a bus driving around there. But we're always trying to get that, I suppose, closest to the lower whole number, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're looking at different things like trip time and trying to minimize layover. I suppose a big part of what we do is this short-term and long-term memory. So we have so much data, like, for some of our clients, like say National Express, I think we've over 3 years worth of data. It's pre-COVID, during COVID, and now post-COVID. And being able to see, what happened this time yesterday, what happened this time last week, but also being able to see what happened this time last year and the year before, and having that seasonal element come into it as well, and being able to make your predictions off that as well. So it's a huge part of what we do with Swift Schedule. I suppose the other really big thing is that has happened through, or that we've been, I think, been very useful for our clients through COVID is this data profiling thing. So we are able to actually profile demand. So what we were able to do through lockdown was, so we had data of what level 5 lockdown looked like in Birmingham, and that level 5 lockdown corresponded with a 20% demand. But now, as we're coming out of lockdown, or as we're hopefully going back to a COVID-free world, we'll be able to actually profile what your demand will look like at 70%, at 80%, at 90%, maybe at 100% at some point. And that's been a huge part of being able to, doing the scenario planning, bringing back in what patronage will look like and how that affects then all your journey times and obviously ultimately your revenue at the end. I suppose what then leads to our three main modules, and I suppose, look, our first module is Swift Metrics, and that's the real insights one that I alluded to earlier. That's where we compile all the data, clean it, join it, and have every KPI that an operator or a transport authority wants across punctuality, efficiency, so like your average speed, the amount of time layover, amount of dwell time, and then all your demand metrics, looking at your patronage, breaking it down by OAP, students, and then comparing that to revenue as well. And I suppose our final module is our Swift Connect module. So that looks at predicted capacity, and that's able, again, tying into the strip chaining, so we could actually see, what we think the capacity of the bus will be in the future up to 2 weeks in advance. I might just roll on to the next slide and give you a little bit of an example of how we are trying to make bus more attractive against a car, I suppose. So look, we've split this simply out into challenge and solution, but it was something we've done with Oxford Bus Companies, a part of the Go Ahead Group, and working with Oxford Council there as well. So I think, so obviously I'm sure people are aware of the national bus strategy that announced, and there was a line in it there that I think it's quoted here. But we want to create a virtuous cycle, increasing usage, but also reducing operating costs, so better service can be sustained without permanently higher subsidy. So key to that is this bus priority measures, and being able to identify where bus priority is needed most. So our data, we obviously do it at a network level. We look at performance at a route level, but we have gone down now to a stop level. So we're able to see the performance at a bus stop, but also between stops. So what we produce for the likes of Go Ahead in this case, but for any operator, we build out a map, and we're able to see, so if you have 20 stops on a bus route and you have stop 1, 2, 3, and you can see the average speed between each stop. Oftentimes, an operator will know that, there's a school here and there's just this one stop between stop 13 and stop 14. The average speed, we're just getting, there's just so much traffic because there's a school stop there, and you'll see it, it'll go, maybe you'll have an average of 13 kilometers, but between that one stop, it will go down to 3 kilometers per hour, for example. But what we're able to do is we're actually able to visualize that. Now, and that has really helped operators being able to speak to their local authorities, being able to actually be armed with data and visualize exactly what it looks like, as opposed to just saying, oh, there's a school here, and we know that it's slowed down, but we can't give you exact facts and figures. So in this case, and probably returning back to this example, we were able to look at the pre-COVID performance, so exactly what it looked like pre-COVID, and what was performance like with full traffic and full patronage. I suppose the one advantage of COVID is we've actually been able to store this. What does free flow data look like? What does my bus network look like without any traffic, as well as quick as it can go between stops? But I suppose that's without any patronage. So what we're able to do there is we're able to, okay, this is how quick the bus could potentially go on this route at its best case. But what does it look like when we start returning patronage? So, maybe at your level 5 lockdown, you might have had 20, 30%, even in some cases, best case. But what does that look like when we return to 80%? And then being able to identify, so we're able to go back to the council, say, these are the pinch points, it's been identified before, very nice presentation on the map view. This is what it looked like on free flow. This is the perfect conditions, but this is what it could look like with 80% demand, and being able to show the return of patronage. So I think there's a line here as well, is the operators can go back and show what ideal journey time, so redeploying the time elsewhere. If there was bus priority in a certain stretch of this route, you'll see the improved efficiency, the cost savings, and of course the service enhancement. This one example, we were able to save Oxford one vehicle on their, I think it was two of their largest routes in Oxford. Ultimately, we were able to reduce journey time by 10 to almost 30%. And look, there was a huge cost savings. And obviously, it just makes bus more attractive against car, and there's not as much congestion in the city centre as well. So look, it's something that is a new route for us. It's being able to, I suppose, if we go on to the next slide, maybe just finally, I suppose something that's been new to us is obviously, as I said earlier, our product was developed with the private operators and really honing in on efficiency. But what we have seen, and also with our work with Transport for Wales, is we're kind of creating this single source of truth that both operator and transport authority are both seeing the same data. They're both understanding, okay, these are where the problems are in our network. If we can address a certain stretch of road, maybe we can introduce a bus corridor, maybe we can introduce a bus lane, maybe there's some sort of traffic light management system. We can make bus more attractive and get more cars off the road. And there's something very, I think it'll be something really big for CitySwift over the next 12 months. And I suppose obviously the national bus strategy and this BSIP piece that, you know, there is these enhanced partnerships coming between the private and the public sector and on the transport. So I really think that it is a really powerful tool to be able to identify where bus priority lies. So obviously I think that touches on the second, probably how we can help. But I suppose obviously what we really do is look, we make journey times better, we improve, we identify the inefficiencies, and we erode them out of the timetables, and then also improve your punctuality. So that's kind of that's how we see our role in probably avoiding this car-based return. I think there's a huge opportunity. The national bus strategy is very ambitious, and look, I think there's lots that we can do in the data side, and look, I hope that we can continue to improve networks there. But very happy to take any questions afterwards. Obviously, I think we are addressing a problem purely from a bus side, so probably a little bit different from Dan and Laurence or Tom and Laurence previously, but I'm very happy to take any questions afterwards.
Thanks, Philip. And the questions are coming through, so you'll get your fair share at the end. And from my perspective, want to think about it. You've talked about the operators, you've talked about the authorities. I'm also interested in how you can involve the users in actually understanding that the reliability, travel times, attractiveness of bus as an alternative to car is really there, because of course that is really where we need to go in terms of people changing their behavior. So last but not least, Duane. Duane Hodges-Stubbs is founder of SolutionLabs. And yesterday I found out that he has got 2 dogs. I don't know if you've got them with you at the moment, Duane, that when they fall asleep, when he talks about transport mainly, they snore. So if there is snoring.
Yeah, they're mooching around at the moment, so apologies, they'll probably be snoring in a moment.
Oh, yeah, they're snoring somewhere else. But anyway, if there is snoring, they're Duane's dogs rather than attendees. So take it away, Duane.
Thanks, Tom. As Tom said, I'm the co-founder of SolutionLabs. When we started SolutionLabs in 2014, we wanted to bring innovation and an empathetic approach to parking and the mobility sector, not only through our own innovation, but inspire to see beyond our own world vision. And our software and services provide a complete range of solutions for private parking operators, land managers, and local authorities. And this includes bespoke ANPR systems, not just now for parking compliance, but more now for data reporting. And our cashless multi-vendor solution called Not Another App, which is reducing the barrier of bringing multi-vendor cashless providers to car parks to allow the motorist to choose which app they prefer to pay for parking through. But with today's subject, I didn't want to just talk about our data products, but I wanted to try and live the problem and see what it would try to take to instigate change through real world experience to help build better products, not just for our clients, but also to understand the data and through real customer feedback. Because we believe there is greater success to be had from changing traditional thought process. So next slide, please. The problem, what I wanted to analyse, is being a middle-aged family man living in the leafy suburbs of Surrey, to see what it would take for me and my neighbours to give up our cars. And the area I live in, I'm 5-minute walk from a mainline railway station to London, with trains leaving every 15 minutes, and I've got a 15-minute walk to Sainsbury's. So I've got a lot of resources on my doorstep. So I wanted to see what it would take to, particularly through the school holidays, to leave the car and move on to public transport. Next slide, please. The problem is, I think in life, is we just love our cars. We live in a world of instant gratification. It's our own personal space to travel. We can relax, play music, sing really badly. And in this world of instant gratification, it gives us the ultimate ability to do what we want, when we want, whenever we want. And with the fear of COVID, we don't have to be around other people. So on the thought process of giving up the car, let's give public transport a try for different days out to take advantage of the infrastructure on our doorstep. Next slide, please. So let's try the train. The station, again, is 5 minutes walk. My daughter wanted us to go and see a Harry Potter convention in Covent Garden. It was a weekday, 10 AM, we had tickets for. So not an ideal place to take the car. 2 adults, 1 child direct, 35 minutes train journey to Waterloo. Getting us there, leaving our station at 9 o'clock to get us there before 10 o'clock. Price, £72. With fuel, congestion charge, and 3 hours of parking would be less than £45. So it shows you the difference between, if we had left to arrive after 10 o'clock, we would have saved the cost would have been £31 using a friends and family discount card. So to encourage people to use the trains, especially families during the school holidays, it would make a lot of sense for these discounts to apply during peak times or any time, because it's clear, particularly in school terms, that we're not commuters. So next slide, please. So after the train review, it was only fair to try the local bus route. So from my house to a local town, which is 5 minutes by train, costs £7.50 return, or 20 minutes in the car. It took 1 hour, 20 minutes by bus for £5.80, because it was literally going around the houses. I mean, this doesn't work for your instant gratification, and for some reason, it always seems to be worse to wait for a bus than it does for a train. Next slide, please. And then COVID happened, and we couldn't go out. But thankfully, with my car, I was able to travel to the supermarket to buy a weekly shop and maybe carry more home or take more groceries home than I would be able to do on a bus or a train. But out of this came a surprising outcome. For the bits that I couldn't get, I could actually press a button on my phone and someone would bring it to me the next day or better within under an hour. So as COVID went on, like many others, my car stood still, fuel was saved, and I replaced my car with home delivery services. So it made non-essential driving less attractive. This could be the answer. So next slide, please. So how do we help the average motorist use their car less and or move onto public transport? So on personal review, I've made a few maybe controversial thoughts that may make me use my car less. Next slide, please. So I am lucky where I live. I do have transportation on the doorstep, so it's a very singular view. But take the trains, make the cost of public transport more attractive. At least make a start around school term times to allow discount travel at any time whenever possible. We seem to have introduced congestion charges to dissuade people to use their car to go into city and town centres, but we haven't made the alternatives any more attractive. So the car will always win because people love their cars. So the bus, it may not be commercially practical to have a more direct service to a town or city centre, but maybe we could look at a more regular service. That may help. And also, I don't know whether you were the same, but when you were younger, there seemed to be more corner shops. So you can just nip round. You spend most of your time as a child nipping around the corner shop for non-essentials. So maybe there could be a drive to bring back the corner shops through maybe government-backed business rates or other tax incentives to help them compete with the larger stores. And also with the current reduction of lanes into cycle and walking lanes, particularly in the cities, it doesn't seem to encourage people to want to use their bike. If anything, it seems to cause more resentment to the cycle lanes, because the people are now getting stuck in the traffic, which is caused by the congestion of the lanes being reduced. Next slide, please. But of course, SolutionLabs isn't a policymaker or a government influencer. But what we can do is provide the software and services to try and empower decision makers to see the effect of their policy change and ensure they are future ready for the increasing data demands. And what I'd like to do is just to highlight a couple of our products today, which will help large land managers, operators, and local authorities to understand their customers and mobility in general. Next slide, please. So the first product we have is our Data Prism product, which, you know, applying data learning methodologies to store data is often very difficult. The speed and complexity of machine learning methodologies means keeping up with new techniques are even more difficult, even for data scientists, as well as the growing number of data endpoints, from sensors to traditional pay and display machines to apps that are innovating payments and transportation, which all require attention, analysis, and understanding in a friendly and easy to use way. So Data Prism is our data acquisition solution that brings together all the fragmented data endpoints and provides bespoke real-time analytics and reporting for the majority of user needs. It not only covers environmental information from CO2 from sensors or calculated vehicle types, but also from customer visits, dwell times, but also revenue and parking compliance, and more reports are being created all the time. We're also adding more sensor manufacturers and services weekly to ensure the service is always future ready. Next slide, please. On top of this, we've got our latest innovation called Input 360, which unites rich data analytics and reporting from Data Prism with the machine learning and artificial intelligence by applying a number of robust and long-standing methodologies applied by data scientists. Once you've grown your data set, Input 360 can start making predictions on the effect of policy change, which should support the decision makers. And this is due to seeing sustained change over time with this data set. Our new tool within Input 360 is descriptive analytics. And what we're working hard on is to allow the system to provide suggested courses of action based on what the data is showing. Again, you know, this will not just cover revenue demands, but also what customers are doing, but also importantly environmental. So really, to conclude, data today is key to the future of policy decisions. By removing data fragmentation and bringing all the data together from all sources into a single platform, you know, you can use your data to aspire effective change and support new economical and environmental policies. Next slide, please. So please contact me or the team if you'd like to find out any more information. And like everybody else, I look forward to any questions. Tom there.
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry, I found a bit of difficulty finding the right button. So thanks, Duane. And we're virtually back on track. So great stuff. Thanks to all the presenters. Questions are coming through. Please keep asking them, although there are lots, and I'm struggling with prioritizing them and allocating them. But we'll see how we do. We've got about 25 minutes left. Can I ask every speaker to come back online and be visible to the audience? If I don't ask your question, people in the audience, it will be because I just haven't been able to get around to it. So forgive me. And you can always ask them directly to the speakers by using their contact details, which they have provided. I am going to start. I'm going to go in order of speaker and perhaps try and ask one question each and see how we go. A couple of technical questions to you, Dan, from the audience. One is, a simple walking time doesn't take into account factors such as someone's mobility, security concerns, and similarly for cycling there may be perceptions of risk and danger. Does your Basemap software take that into account? Do your databases take that into account? Do you see that as important to sort of strengthen the value of the kind of analyses that you can do? And associated with that, a few people have asked, you consider travel times, do you also consider frequency, i.e. one bus that takes 20 minutes has little value, so that affects people's decision making as well. So can you pick those two up for me?
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. So on the first one, every link can be updated to represent different properties to it. So you can turn links off if you notice lots of accidents there. You can use the Stats 19 data from DFD to say, actually, this isn't a safe walking route. We do some work for secondary schools and primary schools looking at catchment areas. So they're looking at effectively where pupils live, and they're working out actually based on their proximity to the school where they could go. And so there's data sets out there that have things like street lighting on there and things like that. So you might not want to walk on a footpath late at night and just have street lighting. So that can be done at the moment. On the cycling side of things, so again, speeds can be adjusted. So you can change the cycle speed. You have the bidirectionality. It can take into account the gradient. So that can be edited. But I know there's some work going on the Ordnance Survey at the moment where they're trying to map segregated cycleways and things like that, surface type for cycleways. And as soon as that data becomes nationally consistent and nationally available, then certainly we can bring that into our system. At the moment, though, we're mainly reliant on sporadic data sets that users need to update the information themselves, but it can be done, and it's done successfully by our users all over the world. Frequency and headway with public transport is an interesting point. So yes, we can, when we do our calculations, we can do frequency calculations to work out the frequency of services. The outputs can show how many interchanges were done. You can work out what the frequency of service was at that interchange. You can put in things such as the minimum waiting time as well. You can, within the application, look at things like p-tail models. You can create a p-tail model within Track that looks at the frequency of a service and the proximity to a public transport stop to give you a p-tail score, which is great for developments. That can be done within there as well. And then you can, and we do have clients that will look at the frequency and will add a headway journey time to the export. So yes, that certainly can be done. The frequency information is all included within the timetable. So once you've got that information in there, you can then adjust it and make adjustments as you see fit, and you can remove the services. Though, the final point I'd add on that is in the urban area, frequency probably isn't so important. You've got services that are running every 6 minutes or 10 minutes in somewhere like London. But if you go to a rural part of Oxfordshire or somewhere like that, you'll have one bus that might pick you up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that is your bus service for the day. And you've got a bus that leaves at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's actually the opposite side of things, where you've got these really low frequent services, and they are actually can be really important because they can be the only way of getting people from A to B in a non-car based mode. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
I'm more than sufficiently done, thank you. Moving on to Laurence. I found this a really fascinating question. I hope you can answer it. Rural areas have seen incredible increases in car-based tourism this year. Leisure travel accounts, according to the person who asked the question, for 63% of the personal miles driven. Isn't this a big missed focus for modeling, for data collection, for evidence building, and for innovation? What do you think we can do with our data and models in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's something that every local authority who's responding to climate change needs to get a grasp of, because you can't make those changes without understanding what's causing the trips. I think the challenge is our traditional approach to thinking about interventions. So I think that some of this is kind of, I guess, where being able to see what's going on in other sectors helps us. So, for example, some work we're doing in the energy sector is the sort of approach I'd really like to try on this problem. So what we're doing there is we're looking at designing district heat networks using generative design. So essentially what that means, we run thousands and thousands of simulations of all of these different options to solve district heat planning problem, and then see which ones come out best. So what we do is we work with the users to set the outcomes. And I think that's something where we can do a similar thing in rural transport. It's all about where you put your kind of hubs. And so we can actually use simulation to understand the best positions and the trade-offs of putting hubs in different locations and what sort of scales they need to achieve. And I think that would help a lot in thinking about what's really viable for rural locations. So that's essentially what I'd love to be able to do that in a project.
Yeah, and in a decarbonisation context, the miles driven are what matters, not the number of trips made. So I see this will have to sort of move up on the agenda for us as data scientists and modelers. Moving on, Philip. A few technical questions from the audience. How do you calculate alighting points on the bus network for origins and destinations and trip chaining, given that passengers are not generally required to tap on or off? Where do you get your data from?
Yeah, I will preface this with, I am not a data scientist. I'm just on the business development side, so I can give you the high level. I won't be able to give you the real secret sauce. Maybe it's a good thing. So what we do is we look at where people, so obviously we know where people got on, but what we do then is we see where people get back on in a different time period of different time frame, basically. So prime example, I might use an Irish example. Say you come from a suburb in Dublin and you go into the city centre for your morning commute. So we then track that same card. Now it's all anonymized data and everything, but we see where that person taps on again with it. And when obviously our models and simulations can tell within reason if that would be where we estimate that person got off. So that's how we build out these boarding demand, or sorry, as we call demand flows, but boarding, origin, destination, and alighting, origin, destination. But ultimately, that's what we do, and it's been able to have those unique identifiers pinging all around cities, and we build out our kind of trip chaining through that.
Yep. I understand the principle. I hope everybody else does as well. The details, as you say, are a bit more complex and may well be your secret sauce. Question for you, Duane. I think like many others in the audience, I was quite surprised by your suggestion to remove bicycle lanes and seeing them as a main contributor to congestion. And as we're talking here about data and evidence, I think there's two questions that arise for me from that. One is there data that cycle lanes cause congestion? I.e., is there evidence that we can actually find and use to support that statement? And alternatively, shouldn't that cycling data be included in the and public transport data and walking data in your data pool to be able to really advise the authorities on the impacts of the policies and the plans that they implement? Because I believe that much of data was focused on cars.
Yeah, absolutely. I think cycling and walking data is almost the afterthought of data modeling when it comes to these things. Is that there's such a focus on cars and transportation that you're exactly right. The cycling and walking, it does. And I think while it is probably a London-centric opinion, and the evidence may contradict or support the need for more cycle lanes, I think it sometimes comes down to that personal perception, particularly when you hear radio calls, phone-ins, and people complaining, and getting in a London taxi just to go from some pancreas, they will complain all the time that it now takes 20-30 minutes longer because the lane has been reduced from 4 lanes down to 3 lanes because of the cycle lane. And then when you look at the cycle lane, there may be 1 bike in the cycle lane. When if the perception is trying to produce an Amsterdam style city, that may come in time, but it may necessarily be too early at the moment.
But isn't our job to provide the data and to avoid the perception? I think that's what we're talking about today, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
because I think that's where a lot of the post-COVID avoiding returning to a car-based solutions need is to actually have clear evidence.
It's one thing, the message to the councillors or the decision makers to say yes, this is working, but it's trying to lay that in a clear and concise way to the general public that actually this is for your benefit and the benefit of not just the environment, but also maybe it may be quicker for you to cycle than it would be to sit in a car.
Absolutely. Another one for you. Go back to you, Dan. It's a question on: have you got examples of where you worked with local authorities or where the products have been used by local authorities on COVID responses, including the EATF projects? What are they? What were the early? Sorry, this is an acronym I am not au fait with. Emergency active travel funds. There you go. Such as temporary cycle lanes and active neighborhoods. Have you got examples where, say, we've done some really good work on collecting information on how they have impacted travel patterns and accessibility?
Yeah, so certainly during COVID, a lot happened about reclaiming space that wasn't used by cars as lockdowns were enforced. There was less road traffic, and so people used our software to work out, well, actually, if we were to put a new cycle lane or a segregated cycle lane here, what would that look like? So yes, we've had some clients ask questions. I don't have any practical examples or a case study I can use, but I know we got asked questions via our support system about how could we model a new cycle lane within this region. And so yeah, we know that people were able to do that. So effectively what they could do is they could say you can't cycle on this road generally because it's not safe or the surface isn't right. If we were to put a new link in or series of links in, you can model the difference that would have. You can then look at flows of people, looking at the OD analysis to work out actually how many more people could access to a job centre or to a hospital or something like use this new mode of transport, this new kind of option. And yes, so it was definitely used as part of that in the past. And yeah, it's been quite exciting to see some of these temporary measures actually now coming to fruition and being implemented full time, which is, yeah, really, really encouraging to see.
Yeah, great. Laurence, you were the only person who spoke about modeling, so the modeling questions all go your direction. And I'm the chair, so I'm impartial. Here's a question around complexity and simplicity. So you talked about moving away from just modeling peak congestion, the need for more analysis rather than just that focus on the morning peak in particular. In your view, will models need to get simpler? But will there many more models, perhaps smaller models or models of only parts of the transport system?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question. I think that models don't necessarily need to become more complex to be able to answer these questions. They just need to be designed to be able to answer these questions. I think if you look at current modeling, we spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get the junctions definitions right. So trying to get our gap parameters and all those other parameters, the cycle times, everything at a specific junction level. So there's a lot of complexity in there that doesn't necessarily need to be in there for the future questions as well. And I guess the challenge with that from a technical side, we put all that detail in and we just convert it into a speed flow curve anyway. So there are simplifications that can be made, but I think the key question here is you can have complexity in the background, but make it simple for a user as well. So you can actually have, it's all about how you design the model so that it's simple for users, simple for all the stakeholders to understand what's going in and coming out. Now, I think of something like the iPhone, right? It's highly complex. I have no idea how it works, but it's really intuitive to use. So I think that we can do lots of things to design models which feel simple to use, but actually complex in the background.
Great, thank you. I can see that that being like the iPhone, something that will continue to evolve for us as a profession. Philip, for you, they all come from Tim Slater. You really excited him, obviously. Bus journey time reliability is also important to users. Do you analyze that? Do you provide that? How can we use that better?
Sorry, what was just to start that question?
Bus time reliability.
Okay.
Not just the average, but the actual, the lack of punctuality, the fit to timetables and so forth.
Yeah, so I suppose going back to, I think, I remember my slide, but we have kind of two strands, or three strands. You take in the raw data, clean it, and then we have that insights piece. So what we do is we do really in-depth analysis on punctuality. It's looking at the overall network's performance, how on time it is. So what does on time mean for, it depends, probably countries, cities. On time, I think in Birmingham we go as 1 minute early and 5 minutes late, and if you are in that bracket, you are reliable. So look, I think National Express is one of our longest uses CitySwift and user of CitySwift, and I like a lot of nearly all their performance is in the plus 90%. But what we can do in that is we can actually, so say that 10% outside potentially, or any operator, you can look at why that's happening. So we can identify, is it early running, is it late running, and break that down. And then we're also able to benchmark routes against each other, because obviously there'll be some routes that are excellently performing and in the high 90s, but equally, you know, there will be routes in 70%, and really then look at early running, late running, then look at it at a route level, but also go down again to that stop level that we spoke about previously, and understand why why a bus is late even at a stop level, and then again it kind of looking at that performance at bus stops, and then also the amount of layover at the end, and being able to so sometimes it's not even a case of, like, we're not always taking time out of schedules, we're just trying to redeploy it as efficiently as possible. But the first step would be identifying why it's late, and then making the actionable, or taking the action afterwards.
Great, thank you. I'll start with you, Duane, but perhaps others have views on that as well. There's a number of questions that come through about data and modeling and evidence on the electrification of not just the vehicle fleet, but also obviously e-bikes and possibly e-scooters as well, and the role of them in achieving or avoiding that car-based recovery, or at least if it is a car-based recovery, it's a car-based recovery to electric rather than ICE vehicles. What kind of data do we have to sort of understand how that is happening in terms of the electrification of the way in which people move? What kind of modeling will be required to understand and support further electrification of the options that are available? I'll start with you, Duane, because you're number 4th on my list. So,
no problem.
And then others that have a view and want to talk about it, please put up your hand, and I'll come through to you in a minute.
With our data products on the sites that we report and gain data for our clients, we have for a long time been given a metric on the number of electric vehicles that or non-diesel petrol vehicles that are actually coming on site for the purposes of investment in electric charging bays, and the need to bring in electric charging bays, and at what point to bring in electric bays. But again, the electrification of cars to the public, is it going to resolve the car-based recovery, or is it just going to increase people's use of cars because they love their cars? Because personally, it is now, I've got electric, I'm now green, therefore the problem of car emissions and the problems that we've been told that causes now effectively have gone away. So therefore, I will probably if I replace my petrol diesel car with an electric car, I comfortably feel better that I'm now okay. And this comes back to then the perception of trying to provide people with the information that actually alternatives may be cheaper, better, or faster than you having an electric car. But with the data that we've seen, of course, with the government bringing in mandatory electric vehicles from 2030, there is going to be a 15-year, 20-year stock to move everybody over to electric vehicles. But we are seeing a single % rise on a lot of sites as more and more people are moving over to electric vehicles.
Dan.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? So my personal view is an electric car with a single occupancy is taking up exactly the same road space as a diesel car with single occupancy. And yeah, we've got real issues of capacity on our roads at the moment. So actually, I think if we just put the same number, if not more cars on electric, it's not really solving the issue at all. I think we're kind of just kicking the can down the road. So we need to promote kind of modal shift in different ways. And there's also, you've got to think about the energy mix. Where's the energy coming from? The energy still coming from, is it coming from nuclear? Is it coming from different sources like that? So that's a really interesting point, I think, as well. But I think there is a role for electric in different modes. So we've just launched a product called EVR, which looks at exactly doing that. So we're looking at switching combustion fleets, where you have got the delivery vans doing that kind of delivery. They're perfect to be electrified because that can reduce the emissions as part of things. They can't be done using other modes. So I think personal transport, I'm not sure electrification really helps it. I think it sends a good message, but we need to promote having more people in the car. But I think for things like fleets of vehicles and things like that, that certainly is a good area, buses and other modes of transport. If we can make them electric, and then we're going to save the planet, aren't we? In the end, there's less emissions as part of that. I think there's a good kind of usage case there.
Thank you. Any of you, Laurence, Philip, adding to that from a data modeling perspective in particular?
I suppose I just echo what Dan and Duane have said previously on the car. It's still the same congestion. I suppose the interesting one from the bus perspective is, where will these charging bays go? And you can't put an electric charging station in the middle of a city because they take up so much space. So it will take a lot of network planning, and also it's where how will you probably have to redesign a bus network around these bays because the batteries, I think at the moment, they can last up to 4 hours if you're in a sunny climate, and if you're in a hilly climate, I think it goes about 2.5 hours. So if you're constantly having to charge batteries, now I'm sure that will improve over time, but it's a big undertaking for cities as well to have to, where do we place these charging points around the city? But again, I'm taking it from the bus perspective, but fully agree with what the two lads had said previously.
Okay, I'm going to go back to, we've got 2 minutes left. First point is a blatant plug for Modeling World, 5 and 6 of October. It's on your screens. My favorite day of the year, apart from my wedding anniversary, obviously. Face-to-face in Birmingham. I can't wait. I hope to see many of you there. You see the details of there on the right, modelingworld.com. And then I'm going to go back for everybody a final quick say, and it's a fatalistic question, but it was the original question that we started off with, avoiding a car-based recovery. Has the ship already sailed? Laurence?
I don't think the ship has sailed. I don't think the ship's ever sailed in terms of what we can do. I think what COVID-19 pandemic's shown is how much behaviour change we can get with collective action. I think at the moment the collective actions are probably wrong, and I think what we're seeing is a return to that individual behaviour that ultimately won't lead us to where we want to get to. But I do believe that the local authorities have the ambition to deliver much better places, and will do so by trying to avoid that car-based recovery.
Thanks. Duane?
I think once the fear of COVID and mixing with others subsides, the return to public transport will probably go back to the numbers that they were, and you'll get the reduction in people use their cars. But the fundamental point is, until the people stop loving their cars and there's a viable, cheaper alternative, then unfortunately, I think we're going to be stuck with the problem for some time.
Dan?
It's a really interesting point. I think the ship is definitely going to be quite hard to turn around. I think the way we are at the moment, everyone's got used to different ways of working from home and things like that. So actually people's mindsets, right, if I've got to sit in traffic 2 days a week, that's not so bad. But if you're working in London 5 days a week, then you don't want to do that every time. So I think we're going to have a bit of a mindset kind of shift of people. I'm not sure how we go about doing that. Do you force that change through kind of governance, or you try and encourage it actively? But I think there's lots of clever people and good people on this panel are trying to make that happen. So I do still have some hope.
And your data should help. Philip, from the furthest away.
Yeah, look, I agree. It's probably that mind shift needing to go back to public transport. Look, I think from in a UK perspective, that national bus strategy looks very ambitious, and I think making all the right noises. I think, you know, there will be a lot of kind of understanding, you know, this origin destination matrix. I know I've probably harped on about it, but understanding what people are doing and these new mobility patterns are so important to make public transport and understand its new kind of patronage and what the new world needs really. But yeah, look, I think, look, there's so much data there. There's some very smart things happening. I'd be pretty hopeful from our perspective. We want to help operators as much as possible, and I'm sure everyone on the panel has different approaches. But look, I think we can make our best efforts anyway to hopefully promote public transport. And yeah.
Okay. We need to stop. I want to thank you all for your contributions and taking on the questions that came hard and fast from the audience. I haven't dealt with them all, but I think we've definitely dealt with the flavor of what was there. Also, thank the audience, the attendees. It was a good attendance. I certainly saw more than 150 at some point. I've got no idea what the final number is. So thank you for taking part. Hope to see you at Modeling World. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.